It's a great pleasure to have a chance to talk to James Mirrlees about his life and work. James, when and where were you born?
Minnegaff in southern Scotland, southwest Scotland, which is a village in one shire that is a suburb of a town in another shire.
And when?
1936, July 1936.
July, so this is your birthday year.
Yes,
and
quite
your birthday month. Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Well, happy birthday, whether it's been or going to be.
Yes.
The Scots have an interest in their ancestry. Go back at least to your grandparents and tell me something about them and their character and anything you know about them. That would be interesting to hear.
My father's father, I was very proud of having gone to work at 7 and retired at 70. Clearly enjoying the jingle. He would have gone obviously to some unskilled employment, but he became what was called an analytical chemist in dye works. He must have done a certain amount of preparation. And he was a real paterfamilias.
This is your grandfather?
That's right.
Yes. By that you mean he was quite a formidable authoritarian character?
Took it for granted that people would do things for him, but he seemed, as far as I remember, quite nice. He was a lot older than me, because he was probably quite a bit older than my father. Fathers tend to be older than sons, but I mean.
Yes.
So my father was born in 1900, and he must have been born at least 40, maybe 45 years before that. But I do remember him in the war, so he must have, and he didn't quite make 90, but he made a decent age.
What about your grandmother?
I never met her.
You
She
didn't
was dead before.
And on the other side?
And that's my mother. My mother's father was the local electrician in a little town called Broxburn near Edinburgh. By that I mean he was in charge of the power station. In these days the electricity was generated in the village. And my mother's mother, I remember as a very nice character, very small maybe. And I don't suppose she ever had any profession. I never heard her talk about it. But she cooked lots of cakes, the right sorts of things that Scottish mothers are supposed to do.
What about your parents?
My father was a banker. He would have left school. He had to leave school at 13, I believe, because the family needed the money. He went to work in a torpedo factory just before the First World War began. And at some stage he moved into a bank. And you know, at least in Scotland, that if you're a banker, you do exams on the job. So you work away. I don't know whether that's true now, but my brother left school at 15, I think, anyway, the first stage he could, and went into the bank, and then did the evening work, and moved up to be a vice president of the Royal Bank of Canada. So it doesn't stop you going quite far in banking.
What sort of person was your father, apart from being a banker?
Very cheerful, full of stories that one had so often, the usual problem. But yeah, he was
You were
nice,
fond of him.
Yes.
He was supportive of you.
Oh yes. I think that's fair. I do remember a point where it's clearly something that was worrying him. He said, "I'm not sure that we can actually afford to send you to university." But, Scotland had rather a low grant level from the local authority. I'm sure that they would have done.
Mm.
So perhaps he was just encouraging me to get some scholarships,
Mm.
which I did.
Well, we'll come to that later and find out
Well,
what you did. What about your mother? What was she like?
Well, because the hesitation
That's what the beauty of film is, you see. The hesitation means something.
yes. I don't know that we ever got on terribly well.
Mm.
There are times
Was she very
suppose I
ambitious?
was growing up at I would have been a teenager, a young teenager at just the time when it can be difficult for some women. I think it was for her.
Was she ambitious for you or not?
I don't think so particularly. They certainly wanted me to get a well-paid job.
Mm.
They were very sceptical about my academic ambitions.
Mm.
Indeed, they thought it was a great mistake.
You had a brother and other siblings, or
Yes, just one brother.
just one brother? Right. Well, tell me about your sort of any first memories, or particularly your first school. Whatever comes as an early memory that might indicate when you became a great economist, perhaps, or not.
Yeah, the memories that come to mind are in some ways a bit embarrassing. I remember on one occasion a teacher had been telling us about the Arctic and the Antarctic. And she had the Arctic in the south and the Antarctic in the north. I don't remember the details. I remember standing up and saying, "Miss, you have it upside down," which I think was very rude. So,
She no doubt thought it was very rude too.
yes, I wasn't punished. So she was obviously quite a nice person.
Mm.
And I do remember being able to do arithmetic very quickly.
Do you? At what age?
I must be thinking of around age 10. Might have been earlier.
Mm.
But I remember that the teacher was inclined to mental arithmetic was a big thing as part of the exam in order to get into the high school. But she was throwing out some probably increasingly difficult problems. And then she'd asked me to explain how it was that I always knew the answer straight away. And I remember actually doing it and being extremely puzzled. But of course I can't remember what I said.
So you didn't know how you did it, but you just knew.
No, the interesting thing is I clearly did know how I did it. But it was things like going to numbers nearby and that made the sum easy and doing the corrections. There was nothing terribly clever about it really. But it involved seeing patterns, so it's clear that I could see patterns in numbers at a fairly early age. Other things I remember, so the early years was when there were evacuees from, in our case, London, to avoid the Blitz in London. And it's interesting looking back that they seemed to be better than us. The separate prizes for the evacuees and the local children.
Really?
Because the local children weren't going to get any prizes. That's how I remember it anyway, whether rightly or wrongly. Sadly, I've totally lost touch with anyone I was at school with primary, or indeed now at secondary level. I'm sure I can't remember any of the names. I know that's very different from, say, my wife, or my late wife, either, who certainly have a lot of connections. That may be an interesting piece of psychology.
What about your secondary school? Where did you go to secondary school?
Oh, in the town, in Newton Stewart, which is the small town that Minnigaff was the suburb of. And it had the high school for that half of Wigtonshire. How many? When I first went, throughout, I suppose, it was a selective school. Secondary, called the high school, Devonshire High School. And the classes were streamed. I think there were 2 levels, A and B. So that shows that it was pretty small. Must have been an annual intake of about 60, 50 or 60. What is there to say about it? I enjoyed my time there.
Were you good at or interested in games at all?
No.
Yeah. Not at all.
Interested. For some reason, I got interested in tennis and cricket. I like the summer games. I think there's an obvious reason, actually. You can't play football with glasses. And my eyesight was pretty poor. If I wasn't wearing glasses, I couldn't see the ball.
Really? Are you short-sighted?
Well, I've now had the benefit of cataract and have artificial lenses inserted.
But you were, as a child,
so I was
short-sighted
from early on.
That's interesting.
I presume because I read a great deal. Same reason the Japanese and increasingly the Chinese.
Yes, I'll tell you. We'll discuss that maybe afterwards. I have theories about it. But that's interesting. So the sports of the summer were nicer. What
Probably,
about
you also asked if I was interested in sport. Probably I'd have been more interested if I was better at it. Because I'm afraid I left an implication that I might have been good at tennis and cricket, which I certainly wasn't.
I associate Scotland, among other things, with fishing, because my father was a keen fisherman. We used to go fishing in Scotland. Did you have that or any other hobbies that you were particularly keen on?
I've never caught a fish in my life, but I have been out on a rowing boat in Scottish lochs. They've tried, but they don't seem to like whatever I put on the line. So I gave up fishing at every stage. My grandfather was a very keen fisherman, but there were no rods in the house or anything like that. And it might have been, maybe we were just a little bit far from good fishing rivers where we were living.
What about other hobbies?
Well, piano was the main one.
Was it?
Not that I started that till I was about 12 or 13.
Do you play now?
Yes, I haven't given up. I keep trying. I'll get there.
Well, that takes us on to the important matter of music. I mean, has music been important in your life?
Yes. Of course, I mean particularly in the enjoyment that you get. So, enjoyment seems a sort of inadequate word. I look back, I particularly enjoyed playing music. And in the time in Cambridge, I was able to play quite a bit of chamber music because I had friends who played violin and cello. And we had a very good time. One of the great advantages of Cambridge is the size of the rooms that you get. You can actually rent a piano and there's room for other people to come in. You can play. What this does to others, economists talk about external diseconomies, the trouble you cause by enjoying yourself.
Well,
I'm afraid this might have had a serious impact.
Well, there are often 2 or 3 doors between you and elsewhere as here, so maybe it's built for such diseconomies. But what kind of music, you said to listen, you liked, what kind of music do you particularly listen to?
I remember starting the piano, at least my parents suggested it, and I said yes, so I'd like to be able to play popular songs. But I'm curious to know why very quickly. You know the kind of music you start with when you're learning piano, which is not really very enjoyable to listen to, but I took to it very quickly and decided classical music was what I wanted. within classical music, I would say pretty Catholic taste. I've never been in a choir, so I don't listen to choral music all that much, although I greatly admire it. I think Tovey said that vocal music was the best.
Who said this?
Donald Tovey.
Oh yes.
And I can sort of see that. And when it comes to leader, I'm almost prepared to say yes, that's the best. But I never got into that. So I'm much more involved with music of Bach and later.
Bach and later.
Well, that's quite a lot by now.
Yes, there's lots.
There's still a lot more to hear. Though interestingly, I think that probably true that you can not only hear all of the really good music written in that period in your life, but you can hear them often enough to pretty much get to know them. That's not going to be true in a few centuries if composers start composing more music.
Especially with computers, they can compose an awful lot. In what way do you listen to music? I mean, do you listen just to relax, or do you, some people find it inspiring in some way. They listen and it seems to feed in some way into their intellectual work as well. Or they have ideas when they're listening.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether I do. Of course, I like going to concerts. The big point of concerts, besides the sense that you're listening with others, is that you really concentrate. I do find that at home, and I always regret it, that I'm inclined to pick up something to look at while I'm listening to music, even if I've set about putting it on to concentrate. I don't recollect thinking that I got stimulated by that. But quite often when I'm getting stuck, the kind of economics I do involves thinking about problems and often doing sort of mathematics and so on. And that's the kind of intellectual activity where you frequently get stuck, at least I do. And it seems to me that then going and playing the piano is helpful. And it may be that doing almost anything else would be equally helpful. But that's the particular thing I feel inclined to do when I'm stuck.
Well, just anecdotally, as you know, well, you may not know, but there's a wonderful concert going on in your college this evening. Two of my favourite things, James Bowman and Handel. So,
well, then Handel is something.
You're a Handel fan?
I'm a fan of Handel.
Yes, so am I. So,
but I didn't.
Great countertenor singing Handel.
Yes.
And Purcell was in Trinity College Chapel. What more could you ask of an evening? So that's something to look forward to. The other thing that I associate with Scotland as well as fishing is Calvinism, or at least religion. Several of my ancestors there were quite, well, in fact there were a lot of them were ministers on the island, Barra and Gia and so on and so on. And so that perhaps naturally leads into the question of something that also often happens at school, which is that either one becomes confirmed and goes through a phase of particular interest in religion, or one begins to question it, or both. Well, firstly, were your parents interested or involved in religion?
Well, my father was a church elder. I'm pretty sure my mother had little interest in it, and I don't think she ever went to church after Dad died. Indeed, I don't think they went to church that much in later years. I do remember him getting worked up about religious issues, but this was the great fraught question, whether you should have separate cups for communion wine or a single cup, which tearing the congregation apart at some stage in my youth. I take that to be a signal that in a sense, religion is not very important to him. But he cared about that. That's clear. But he cared about it entirely on health grounds, and not on theological. I suppose took religion, Christianity, Church of Scotland Christianity very much for granted through my youth. I was confirmed, or whatever we called it, in the Church of Scotland. But I didn't do very much. I would have gone to church most Sundays, I think. And I do remember that I listened to the sermons. Then, at some stage at university in Edinburgh, I got drawn into the student Christian movement and paid a bit more attention to it. Certainly, if asked, I would have said, well, yes, I'm a Christian. That's Christian. But it wouldn't have taken much of my time then. Looking back on it, I really don't understand, because now my view is that it's all nonsense.
All nonsense.
Maybe a bit extreme, but there you are. It does seem to me an intriguing question, how these beliefs and practices have arisen. I'm sure that there's something very important there, but it's certainly not something that appeals to me. I'm quite contrary. But when I was in Cambridge, I was a member of the Student Christian Movement, and indeed I was president for, not KQ, Student Christian Movement, which is the liberal side, I think you might call it, part of the ecumenical movement. I would never have thought that being born again or anything like that would be utterly disreputable. So I certainly wasn't of that persuasion.
If you were president of the Student Christian Union, there must have been
Christian movement.
Sorry.
Yes.
Movement. Did it just fade away, or was there a sort of particular point at which you decided that this was all nonsense?
No, it went on for a while, and I think it would have been about 3 years into Oxford, early 1970s, but decided didn't at all understand why I thought that there was a case.
The head of your college, Martin Rees, is often quoted. People seem to approve his formula, which I think he may have repeated in the interview I did with him, which is that he's a non-believing Christian. It also seemed to be the view roughly of Don Cupid, who I've also interviewed. Basically, they like the ritual and the forms and the history and the associations. It's just the actual dogma which is intolerable, or at least wrong, or irrelevant, or misguided, or something. Do you have that sort of view, that in other words you wouldn't object to going to chapel if an elderly colleague of yours had died, or even joining in a service, but you just don't believe any of it is helpful?
Yes, that's right. Yes, I don't believe any of it, and I don't believe it. Well, it would be wrong to say I don't believe it's helpful, because there are clearly people who are
helped by it.
Of course, I have no objection to listening to Grace or going to chapel to listen to good music. And yes, I actually do think there is something helpful or right about the ceremonials associated with memorial services, funerals, I don't think they need to have mentions of God and things, but I'm not going to complain if that's the language that's used.
Yes. Right, well, let's just finish the school. Were there any subjects which you were really particularly enthusiastic and taking to by the end of your time at school? Or you mentioned maths. Were you doing...
Maths was dominant, certainly. And otherwise, I dare say I enjoyed most subjects. With it being Scotland, of course, you do a whole range of subjects right through. We didn't do much history, and that gets pushed on the sidelines. And of course, I later discovered that history gets interesting after the point at which you do the little bits of cramming, remembering dates and places for what's called lower history in Scotland. Latin didn't appeal much. I seemed to manage it all right.
I'm not sure whether you went somewhere else before, but you obviously ended up in Cambridge. How was that, and how did you get the money to go to university?
Yep. It's a kind of complicated story. Let's do it very briefly because it's not of great interest in a way. Although I have noticed when reading some of the Nobel autobiographies that others have written, that there are often interesting obstacles in people's way, some accidents that happen that throw them completely off track. What had happened was that the school inspector had come to the school and noticed that I had got rather good marks in maths papers a year early, said I should go to Cambridge. And the school said that they sort of heard of Cambridge, but didn't quite know what you did in order to get to Cambridge. And they learned that in these days, although an English girl or boy could get a grant from a local authority to go to a Scottish university, a Scottish girl or boy could not do the same and go to England. The grant was smaller in Scotland, but it wasn't that you could take the smaller grant and go to Cambridge. You just couldn't go. They wouldn't give you a grant at all. With one exception, which was that if you got a scholarship, an open scholarship, Cambridge scholarship, as they were in these days, there were entrance scholarships, that you'd get supplementation from the Department of Education in Edinburgh, as it was called, so not your local county. Special arrangement, and that's what the inspector was after. So in other words, I had to take the scholarship exam. I don't know if you went through this great trial.
I took an attempted scholarship at Oxford, yes.
Right. That maths scholarship exam, I know in retrospect, is quite strange. And normally, as I understand it, people will be taught by those who got to know that exam very well over a long period of time. And in my school, nobody had ever heard of the Cambridge Scholarship exam. So we put me in for it and got a hold of exam papers by writing away to bookshops. And then I settled down to try to solve the problems in the exam paper, which are at a level well beyond what you do for Scottish school exams, at least did in these days. And my maths teacher, awfully nice chap, called McFadgen, who long dead, I'm afraid.
What was his name?
McFadgen.
McFadgen. Oh, right.
And he'd been enormously helpful to me, and was helping me along lending me his maths books and things like this. But we got busy, and it was a competition between the two of us to solve these problems, which I'm happy to say I managed better than he did. But there were some occasions it took us a day or something or more to do it. Now there was one key fact we were not aware of. We thought when you've got a paper with 10 questions in it, you're supposed to answer them. And so we were working at trying to enable me to, in 3 hours, answer 10 scholarship questions. And I believe that was not what was expected. So if people got 2 or 3 done, I think that was going to earn the scholarship, if I understand it right. I got to that point. It would have been fine. But a week before the exam, I got a burst appendix. Got rushed off to hospital in Glasgow. That was that. So that's why I went to Edinburgh instead. 3 years later, I took the scholarship exam. There were actually 2 of us from Edinburgh who took it that year. Keith Moffat took it, and was director of the Newton Institute at one point, contemporaries. And of course, at that point, it was a doddle for us to take the exam, and we got scholarships. I think I heard that Trinity decided enough of this nonsense. They weren't going to keep having people come down and do another undergraduate degree.
You'd already done one undergraduate degree.
Yes, of course. Yeah. But I'm rather happy with the fact that I started with an MA and then I went on to get a BA. Because in Scotland they're MAs. As a 4-year, supposedly 4-year course. I did it in 3. All of this could have been a great waste of time. But I don't think it was, partly because, very oddly, I escaped national service. Because just at the point when I was going to Cambridge, the government said we've got a terrible shortage of mathematics. So people who graduate with firsts in mathematics and who are going to go on using the mathematics don't have to do national service yet. And the Trinity had insisted everybody did national service before they came out. So they said, oh, well, in this case, you can come straight away. So I was coeval with people coming in straight from school, accepted by national service. That was probably a good thing. That worked quite well.
I was imagining you came straight to Cambridge and was going to ask you whether you can remember your first impressions of coming here from some small Scottish town, but obviously you come from Edinburgh, so it wasn't such a big shock or anything. But do you remember coming to Cambridge and how it struck you then?
It was a bit of a shock. I came down to do the scholarship exam, and you get put up for the week or the few days in college. There was in this palatial room with a separate bedroom. This was quite different from what I had in Edinburgh. So that certainly impressed me. That building was pretty good, but quite good in Edinburgh. That wasn't it so much. And then when I arrived, another occasion when I was ill, I flew, and so I got in a week late. I suppose it must have been a bit disturbing. You don't quite get in on the usual introductory things. So I dare say it was a bit confusing at first. But very quickly I was tremendously impressed by the sense that people were teaching at a different intellectual level from Edinburgh. I'm not saying that they couldn't have done it in Edinburgh, but somehow the tradition was there that you wouldn't do the really abstract mathematics. in the first year at Cambridge they were doing things at the level of abstraction that was not done in the undergraduate degree in Edinburgh at all. And it was partly associated with the sheer intellectual quality of the teachers. So that, I think I became quite sensitive early on to people being very clever and enjoy that. So that's what's so nice about Cambridge. Just a lot of people who are very bright and very hard to keep up with.
Were there any particularly bright and hard to keep up with teachers that you remember from that period in Cambridge? Trinity's famous for its mathematicians and other.
Yes. Oh well. So the people who taught me in that first year, and actually I had only 1 year of supervision at that stage. Although when I moved to economics, it's actually done by supervisions on an informal basis. But then Michael Tia taught us for a term or two, and John Polkinghorne teaching.
Who I've interviewed, yes.
Peter Swinnerton Dyer. I've forgotten whether he was actually teaching or it's just that I got to know him. Castles. Pretty good.
Pretty good, yes. But you just did 1 year and then you changed to economics?
No, I did 2 years, but the second year was part 3, Tribus, which didn't in these days involve any supervision at all.
Right.
Just meant going to very hard courses and struggling with. That's it. I did all right.
You did all right.
And I probably didn't spend as much time on mathematics as I should have. But it's generally believed you can't spend an awful lot of time on mathematics. People vary greatly.
What else were you doing? I mean, were you involved in?
Well, there was this student Christian movement that I was presiding over, which involved quite a lot of time.
You were doing
and
public
then I went to
speaking?
all kinds of...
Were you in the union?
No, but I belonged to a lot of clubs. So I went along to, I remember Sunday evening sessions of the little think tank group in the Labour Club.
You weren't an apostle. You're allowed to say.
Yes.
I've interviewed several apostles and they've told me, so if you were, you can tell me. But
yes, but not at that point.
no, you were later.
Okay, well, it was while I was in commerce that I got ushered into that.
So after 2 years of this, you then changed into economics? Or?
Yeah. So in that second year of mathematics, I still don't know exactly why things happened that way. But I'm sure mathematics was beginning to become hard, which it hadn't been up to that point. Also, I'm definitely getting bored with it, and was questioning what it's for, really. Associated with particularly SCM kind of Christianity was social conscience. And that was quite strong, and I wanted to do something useful. I was actually finding it rather hard to imagine quite what I would do that would be good. Although I did get as far as applying to go on and do a PhD in maths. But just in that last term I decided, no, it's a mistake, and I'd like to do social science. One of the many societies I was involved with was the Sociology Society.
Okay.
At that time sociology didn't exist. And this is opposition for you anthropologists. But certainly I don't remember us seeing any anthropologists at meetings of the society. And just for a week or two, I think I seriously played with the idea. I think sociology was just going to come in as a subject. But Peter Swinnerton Dyer sent me along to see Pierre Straffer, one of the more famous Trinity economists. So he'll explain to you that economics is the subject to me. And I remember that Joan Robinson turned up partway through that meeting, which was the first time I met her. I honestly can't recollect that they said anything that persuaded me that economics was right, but I had been curious about economics for a while, so I think I was quite easily nudged into it. But I was curious. One reason was that I thought it had to do with curing poverty, and that's a very strong motivation for getting into it. But the other was, I think, just this sheer puzzlement that it's in a way quite a famous subject, and I couldn't make head or tail of it from talking to economics students. Any other subject I could pretty much find out about it by talking to them. Somehow it's obvious what history is about. I didn't have physics, chemistry, school, literary subjects, all of these. So for some reason economics was the most mysterious and puzzling. I could almost say it was the only subject I didn't understand. But obviously
and the rest of your
full
life has
understanding.
been trying to understand it.
And that's right, still at it.
So who were your main teachers when you started studying economics?
There was a very special person, David Chamberlain, who had been professor in Oxford, and a man of many eccentricities, and one of them was that he got fed up with being professor in Oxford, and Cambridge managed to invent a readership for him. Unusual to have a readership that brings somebody in. But he did that. He once told me that trouble with Oxford was you couldn't, at high table you couldn't talk about science fiction and you couldn't talk about computing. What else is there to talk about?
Why not? I mean, I always thought you couldn't talk about religion, sex and politics, but I didn't know about science fiction.
Oh, this was the incapacity of his interlocutors.
Oh, I see. They were incapable.
Not any prohibition.
Oh, I see.
But certainly in Nuffield there was no prohibition about talking politics, for example.
Yeah.
And Nuffield in Oxford was where he was. Anyway, he arrived back the year that I was starting economics. They assigned Dick Stone to be my supervisor. And they got a Nobel Prize a bit later on, so that's clearly some effect there. That was very nice. But Dick arranged that David would actually teach me economics. So David arranged that I would come along once a week with the supervisions. Right. And that was fine. I wouldn't have said that he was a notably good teacher, except that I do know quite a number of other people who found him very valuable, valuable supervisor. But first meeting, he said he'd just been reading the general theory, so he'd like me to go away and read the general theory and write something about it for next week. I'm trying to grapple with Keynes at that stage. It's not that easy. It tended to go on a bit that way. Throw things at me, which I was puzzled to do, but I learned a lot from that. He had been, I think, a choral scholar of Keynes.
Chamberlain.
Yes. And been more than on the edge of the Keynes group.
So were the other Keynes economists like Keldor and Calm and so on active at that time, or were they a bit later?
I mean, when David Chamberlain was in Keynes? Oh yes, they were very active. I don't think he was actually a member of that sounding board group that read the drafts of the general theory and reported comments back to Keynes. But he might have been along to some of it. However, he was much more mathematical than the others. He was a mathematical economist and statistical economist, and a very good one.
Mm. Did you, I'm not sure of Keynes's dates, but did you overlap with him at all?
No. He died even before I got to Cambridge. I think early 50s he died.
And his shadow was still there.
Oh, the shadow has been over Cambridge economics for a very long time. I don't think it is now. Bob Rotham might have had a different view. But it was refracted. We don't refract shadows, you know what I mean. But anyway, it shouldn't be the shadow of Keynes, it should be the light of Keynes. So it was refracted through a number of powerful personalities who, I think in many ways, took it in a different way from what I imagine Keynes.
Did you know Luigi Passinetti
Yes.
at all? He was
Oh yes, he was already, he would have been something like a research fellow when I started economics, and was a lecturer by the time I came back from India to lectureship. And several years older, pretty much contemporary with Mortis Sam. So it was a couple of years.
He was here when I
before
first
me.
came. Yes. When you came back from India?
Yeah, well, after I finished my PhD work.
Well, tell me about the PhD first. What was the subject of it?
Well, having explained how I was abandoning mathematics and
Yes.
going into economics in order to understand economics and do something about poverty, I got interested in planning because Dick Stone had a group who were studying planning in a way. That's to say, they were devising a model of the British economy which could do what they called indicative planning, meaning it would show the way the economy might well go. It wouldn't necessarily mean that anyone gave commands to say that that's how it would go, but it would be indicative. However, that meant I naturally got interested in these decision problems of what should a government do, what should a country do. And Dick Stone encouraged me to take an interest in Frank Ramsey's famous problem of how much you should save. He wrote this brilliant paper in a spare few days in economics, where he offered an answer to that question. And I thought that was quite an interesting question, and puzzled over it for a time. And then I thought, well, one thing that's odd about it is that it takes no account of uncertainty, and non-economists tend to think that the obvious thing about economies is that they're very uncertain, and all kinds of things keep happening, and you can't forecast them. So, what about that? So I took that problem up, and that's what my PhD thesis was about. It was about how you could work out decisions on a question like how much an economy should save, and how that decision would be influenced by taking account of uncertainty. Curiously enough, this was a subject that it turned out quite a number of American economists had begun to think about as well. A number of papers happened simultaneously, and I never, well, not until much later did I publish a paper on the subject.
Why do you think there was this concurrent, it almost sounds like a paradigm change, which was...
Yeah. Yes, it did turn out to be. It's now a major part of... Ramsey saving is a key part of the economics education of the young. It certainly wasn't anywhere in the world in the 60s. But it seems particularly surprising because American economists were not interested in planning.
But they weren't
And
interested
this
in
seems to be
uncertainty.
very much a planning kind of question. You think of a government as taking decisions about how much saving should happen in the economy, which they can control rather imperfectly by interest rate and so on.
Were you focusing this on India in the PhD, or was that later after you'd finished?
Oh, I continued a serious interest in development throughout that time, reading a lot of the books on development. But nevertheless, I didn't make any serious connection. It's just that I was delighted to get the chance to go to India.
Was this after the PhD? Or?
Yes. Yes. It's when I'd finished the PhD work. I actually didn't write the thesis until I came back from India and spent the summer in Plockton in Scotland, typing away on a little typewriter, and created the thesis, but it was worked out before I went. However, in India, I didn't continue with that particularly, and indeed in that time I pretty much decided that taking a very command planning view was quite the wrong way to be running an economy.
Was this in reaction to this was the time that the Indian government were doing 5-year plans and so on?
Yes, that's right.
So in reaction to that you were...
Well, in reaction to the bad results of them trying to do it. But there are quite a number of examples which major economists have already drawn attention to.
Were you
taking
aware,
quite the wrong decisions.
What date was this?
I was there 62, 63.
Were you already aware of the disaster? Well, it was just before the Great Leap Forward, but I mean, were you aware of... Well, it was actually, it was just after.
China.
Were you aware of at all of the disasters of planning in China?
No. No, on the contrary. I think perhaps I probably heard John Robinson talk about China too much, and she believed that it was going great. It was more or less the perfect economy.
Was that, I mean, that's always been a puzzle to me and many other people, but both she and Needham went there, presumably, and saw something. Did they just deceive themselves, as many people did in Stalin's Russia, or did they want to believe this, or did they not want to betray their friends in China, or why did they go on like this?
Well, I'm sure that John Robinson at least really believed that the Chinese economy was working pretty well. During that time I was in India, she passed through. The daughter was living in India at the time. And, I remember us going around some fields in a village in India, and she was talking about how very well organized the Chinese were, very efficient. And we told them to do something, they did it. As compared to these Indians who were feckless and was going nowhere. It's fair enough about India, a lot of fecklessness. But in India I certainly experienced the business being taken to some villages which were showpieces. However, being India, the next day I'd be taken to a village that was the complete opposite. Because there's wonderful honesty about India, which shows up in things like the poverty data, something like that. They don't seem to hide anything. With one exception, we managed to take a really nice big map of this to India. But this was the year of the India-China war. China invaded. It turned out China had built a road in what India thought was their territory. And it took a while before they noticed.
63?
The war. 63. Probably started at the end of 62. And unfortunately, that took a lot of the attention of India during that time. I think I could have learned more if I hadn't got worked up about the war and then thinking so much about the economy.
So when you came back, by now were you a fellow at Trinity, or were you a junior research fellow? Or?
Yeah, they had one of those things. I don't think it could quite happen now. But the year before I went away, that's my third year as an economics student, I got lured over to Oxford and Nuffield College in Oxford offered me a research fellowship, which I would have come back to after the year in India. And within a week, Trinity trumped it by offering me the teaching fellowship that was vacated because Amrita Sen was going to India and to the Delhi school a year later. So I grabbed that. And a little bit wondered that I had put in for a research fellowship at the end of my second year, but with a thesis which, in retrospect, was really not something I should have been trying to get a research fellowship with. Although I was probably the proximate case, I think, in the election. And of course I had intended to put in a thesis that year. And I suppose probably I would have accepted nothing instead. That might not have been so bad. The advantage of having a good many years just to do research, that would have been pretty good. And unfortunately I didn't do that.
You came back to teaching.